guys, it's Kristen with ICStarsQuilting.com. I have an important tutorial for you today. This one has been requested multiple times. It's time we get down and we do it, okay? If you plan on showing your quilt at any shows, local, international, whatever, okay? But into the galaxy, whatever. Any type of contest or show where it's hanging, even if you just want to hang your quilt in your house and you want the proper way to do it, I'm gonna show you how to do that today. Also, I just want to point out, I got these glasses in the mail today from a friend. How gorgeous are these glasses? These are like, if they were prescription, I would never take them off. But you're going to at least have to wait until I am dead asleep tonight to pry these off my face because I love them so much. Okay, so we're gonna do the tutorial with the glasses on because they're fun. I recently just finished a quilt project and there's no way that I can back up enough to show you this quilt. So here is my finished quilt. It is a project that I did with my FPP class, my foundation paper piecing class. Now it's called Say Something FPP Academy. I'm gonna put the link down below for if you are looking to get into paper piecing, this is the class for you. There is a wait list right now for this class, but there's a link down below in the description box. You can get on the wait list. As soon as I open those doors again, you will get an email plus an early bird discount if you're interested in that as soon as those doors open again and when you can enroll. Back to the quilt. And I love it so much. So I've decided I want this quilt hanging on my wall in my home. Problem is, I don't want to use just push pins on this quilt, right? I want an actual legit hanging sleeve because I think I may enter this quilt into some local contests, okay? So we're gonna learn how to do step by step the real way to add a sleeve to the back of your quilt. First thing you need to do is measure your quilt from the top left to the top right, okay? From side to side, measure your quilt, how long that is. That's how long a piece of fabric that you're going to need is. Now, my quilt measured 54.5 inches because it's a custom piece and I made it to fit the fabrics that I had, okay? So it's 54.5 inches, which, as you can guess, is bigger than 40. So I'm gonna have to piece my sleeve together, okay? Keep that in mind. You may have to do a little bit of piecing. This is the piece that I needed to make this the right size. You're gonna need a piece that is 9 inches by the width of your quilt, okay? 9 inches by the width of your quilt. And then if you have to piece it, make sure you go ahead and add in an extra 1/2 inch for that piecing in the middle, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna piece these two together and then I will have 9 inches by the width of my quilt. So here's the seam that I just sewed right here. I'm gonna take it over to my pressing mat and do it nice and flat. Now this is just so that I can get the full width of my quilt, okay? Some of you may have smaller quilts and you won't have to do this seam. Ta-da! There's the seam nice and flat. And I've got, right now this is the wrong side of the seam. So the right side is beautiful and perfect. Here's the wrong side of the seam. The next step that we're gonna do is we're gonna take this back to our pressing mat and I wanna show you how to do this next step properly. So this is my 9-inch side. I have 9 inches by 54.5 inches for my particular quilt. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to fold this over roughly 1/4 inch, okay? Roughly 1/4 inch. And I'm gonna press it nice and flat, okay? This is gonna give us those nice even edges. After you folded it 1/4 inch, you're gonna fold it one more time just to lock in that raw edge. And press it nice and flat. Then you're gonna do the same thing to your other side and you're gonna sew right here on the edge to make sure that that stays where it's at, okay? You wanna make sure this stays, and look, we've locked in all of our raw edges here, okay? So go ahead, do the other side, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna sew both of these. And also, if you're wondering why we did our sleeve the exact same size as our quilt, these edges right here are going to take up that extra space and pull it in just a little bit, but you're gonna have a nice even hanging surface across the entire quilt if you do this and you make it exactly the same width as your quilt and then follow the instructions to fold in the edges. Right there is my finished edge, and that's what it looks like on the back side. So it's a nice, beautiful seam. I did choose a thread color that kind of blends in a little bit. It isn't perfect, but again, this is on the back of my quilt, and this is really just a sleeve used for hanging. After you've got these sides sewn together, you're going to go to your pressing mat and you're going to press them wrong sides together. This seam that you're going to make right here, not really a seam, it's more of like a line, I guess, is going to be your guide for the next step. So you want to make it nice and crisp where you can see it, but like you don't have to worry about like starching it or anything, all right? So you're just going to line up your edges right here and press all the way down. I've got my wrong sides together going down the lengthwise of this, and press and make sure that you have a nice, good, crisp line there. After you've done that and you have a nice crisp seam here, you're gonna open this up. Now these are the presses that are really, really gonna matter. They are going to define the top of your sleeve and the bottom of your sleeve, okay? So you're going to take these sides and you're going to fold them to where they meet in the middle. Okay, now you want these lines really, really nice and crisp because this is going to be what you're going to hand stitch to your quilt, and you want these sides to be very, very defined. So maybe give it an extra bit of time with your ironing, okay? Give it just a little bit extra. And then same with the bottom. You're going to want to take the sides and meet at that crease in the middle. Again, making sure that these creases are very, very well defined. And I'm doing, again, wrong sides together here. So the right side is all the way out. That's done all the way down here at the bottom. Next thing you're going to do is you have these seams. You can see them very well, okay? Don't iron on them. You don't want them to go anywhere. You're going to take these and you're going to sew a 1/4 inch all the way down. Now I have wrong sides together. Don't worry, this is all gonna work out okay, all right? I have wrong sides together and I'm gonna go all the way down with wrong sides together and create a seam with my sewing machine right there, okay? In this part, I find it's easier just to press the seam to one side. However, you do want to be aware of the seams that you have already pressed, especially these two side seams right here. If you'll notice, by taking away that 1/2 inch of fabric right there, we have made it so this has a little bit of a hill or a hump, so to speak, right? So there's a little bit more fabric on this side of your two side seams as there is on this side. That's what we want. That's good. Now, when you go to press this seam to one side, because that's just a little bit easier to deal with than trying to press it open, is you want to make sure that you are not ruining this side seam that we so carefully press down on, okay? So I'm just going to iron this from one side to the other with this seam pressed to one side. You can see I've kind of like already have this seam pressed down so that I know that's where it is, and if the iron goes back over it, it's okay. But I want this pressed to one side. Okay, good news is you're done with the ironing, okay? You're done with the ironing and the back and forth from your machine to the iron table, okay? Next thing that you're going to need is your quilt. You're also going to need, this is the back of my quilt, by the way. See this lovely backing? This is the back of my quilt, and this is the front. You're gonna wanna sew this on the back of your quilt. That's important. You're also going to need some pins, and you're going to need the sleeve that you just sewn, okay? So we're going to pin this a 1/2 inch from the top of your quilt. That's important. You want to do a 1/2 inch from the top of your quilt. That will give your rod or whatever you're hanging your quilt on enough of a clearance where it's not going to go over the top of your quilt, and it should sit just directly at the top of your quilt and not go over, okay? So let's look at that and let's pin together. I'm going to show you how I pin the sleeves on my quilts. Okay, I like to find the middle of my quilt sleeve because we want it to be even all the way across, right? Which mine is right here. I just did that by folding these ends together and then finding the middle here. And I'm gonna stick a pin right where the middle is so that I can find that in a second. Then you're gonna find the middle of your quilt and you're gonna join these two right in the middle. Okay, so here is the middle of my quilt. I'm gonna kind of lay it out where I have a little bit more room to work with. And the middle of my sleeve. Now, remember that seam that we had here on the inside that I just told you don't worry about it, just push it to one side? You're going to want to push that seam facing down to the bottom of your quilt, okay? This is the top of my quilt, by the way. This is not the bottom. This is the top of my quilt that I'm sewing this to, okay? You wanna put the seam on the inside of your quilt right here where you're not going to be able to see it, and you're going to want to line up where these pins are. Now I kind of want to take where this seam is, okay, that we ironed, where I said this is the edge of your quilt sleeve right here. Find that seam and find the middle, which I can barely see the pinholes right there, and you're going to line that up right here. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna put another pin in it right there, okay? So this is the middle of my quilt right here and the middle of my sleeve, and I've got it down about a 1/2 inch from the top, okay? You want this nice and even all the way across. If you need to get out your ruler, go ahead and get out your ruler to make sure that you've got like a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. You wanna do a 1/2 inch down, okay? And then, while you're at it, go ahead and pin this bottom here too, okay? Because both of these are going to need to be pinned because we're going to hand stitch them together. The reason that we hand stitch is I don't want any stitches to show up on this side of the quilt. This is the one that I want everybody to see. This is the one that I want to show. We're going to hand stitch in between the layers of your quilt. But we have to get everything put where it is. Now you're gonna notice there's like this little flap right here. That will all turn out okay. Don't worry about it, okay? So let's go down your quilt sleeve right here and line it up 1/2 inch from the top and add pins so that it stays in place. My middle one I put straight up and down like that, but normally I like to do it like this just because it holds things a little bit better. After, I will probably take out this top one and then just have the pins on the side. That way it just stays together nicely and I don't have to worry about getting stabbed with the pins. This part, there's no rules whether you want to do all of the top and then follow by doing all of the bottom, or if you want to do them back and forth. Either way is perfectly fine. You just want the slack of the sleeve to be on the top, and I'll show you a little bit better pictures of that in just a minute, but you want the slack of your sleeve to be on the top, and then everything else pressed very nice and tight against the back of the quilt. Okay, I'm gonna put my last pin in here just to make sure that everything on the very end stays in place. I have my thread doubled up on the end of the needle right there, and then I have just a standard hand tying knot here on the edge. So you're going to need some thread for this. You're probably going to need to change your thread a couple times if you have a larger quilt. I've zoomed in so you can see what I'm doing. I am right-handed, okay? So when I sew, I have the needle head right here in between my fingers, and I have the point of the needle pointing to my left, okay? So I like to sew this way. If you're left-handed, you may want to start on the left-hand side of your quilt. Right now, I have the right-hand side of my quilt. I'm going to push this up through. I'm going to go inside my sleeve right here and go up through, because that way I'm tucking in the knot and I'm kind of hiding it, okay? So I'm going to bring this through, and then I'm going to lay this down exactly where I want it to go. And I'm going to go through my quilt, and I'm going to pop up right back through the sleeve about 1/4 inch down. Now, when I did that, I did not enter this side of the quilt at all. The reason we're hand stitching this is because we want to hide our threads, okay? So you don't want to be able to see this from the top side at all. I'm kind of going in through the fabric and maybe catching a little bit of the batting while I'm doing that too, to give it a little bit of extra strength. So I'm going to pull this, and it won't do that next time because I will have more stitches in there, but I'm going to pull this through. And I'm just doing a simple whip stitch. Like, you won't really be able to see that I have stitched at all, but it's still there, and it still gives my quilt some really good strength while it's going to be hanging in several shows, hopefully, right? Or it's going to be hanging in your house for a very long time. You want to make sure that this sleeve is secure. And if you're going to take the time to sew it on there, hand stitch it on, right? Because you know I'm all about making things easy. I do my binding by machine and all of that, which I'm probably do an updated binding video fairly soon. But I do hand stitch these because I don't want this to show up on the front of my quilt. This is for the back. This is for hanging purposes only. Also, this is soft enough to where you don't have to take it off ever. Okay, you can still use the quilt as a quilt, and if you want to show it later on, this is not going to get in anybody's way, okay? So it is still soft enough to use. You don't have to worry about it never being able to be used again. But if your purpose is to have it hanging on the wall, this is great. You can put the dowel rod all the way through your little sleeve that you have hung there, and your quilt will be nice and evenly displayed. Now, as you can see, I've done from here to here. Let me get in and show you just a little bit more. If you look super duper close, you can see some tiny little ticks of my thread. That's because I'm pulling this back and I'm trying to let you see them, okay? Really, you won't be able to see that I have added these whip stitches in there after this is hung up, okay? There's no reason for it to show. Now you're gonna go all the way across the top, and then you're gonna turn around and go all the way across the bottom. So put on your favorite movie, add some Netflix in there, do what you gotta do to pass some time. Take this on a vacation with you or something, and just get to sewing. It really does not take that long. It just takes a little bit of practice and making sure that you are not going all the way through this to the other side of this quilt, okay? You wanna make sure that you stay off of this side and on this side. I normally like to have my finger back here so I can feel as I'm doing the needle. That's that. It is a really, really important skill to know. This method that I have showed you has been the one that has been requested by the quilt shows that I have attended and the quilt shows that my quilts have been in, okay? this is kind of the standard. We want everybody to do this method so that all of our quilts hang exactly the same. There are other methods out there on the internet. I'm sure I do not have the only method on how to do this, okay? But this is the way that I have been taught, the way that quilt shows around me have requested it, and I feel like it is the most widely known method as well. So this is what the end process looks like right here. Once you have sewn your edges down, you will have that little half moon circle, whatever you call it, at the top. That's the slack where your curtain rod or your quilt rod, whatever your dowel rod is going to be there, okay? You want to give it just a little bit so that it doesn't pull on your quilt. That's why we have that slack in the middle. We don't want the edges of your quilt to form around that rod. We want to leave a little bit of slack so that your sleeve can be the one that forms around the rod and not your quilt. Your quilt will hang nice and flat. So I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope that you are thinking, you know, maybe I could have a couple quilts in a show now that I know how to do the sleeve on it. I encourage you, if you have something that you're proud of, hang it in your house. Look into the local quilt shows. See what types of events you can enter, what types of ways that you can show off your work. Be proud of it. Hang it where you can see it. Use it on your couch. Use your quilts, okay? That's what they're meant for. Use them. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them down in the comments down below. I would love to see them and answer them. I answer all of my comments. For links to the products that I used today, the pins, all the fun stuff, because I always get questions about those pins. For links to the products that I used today, make sure you check out the description box down below. I also list my favorite quilting products and tips that I have down there too. Make sure you check those out. Until next time, I'm Kristen with ICStarsQuilting.com. For more tips, tricks, and tutorials for the modern quilter, please subscribe to my channel. It helps me out. I really enjoy producing these videos for you. If you have any suggestions, feel free to send them to me. I would love to hear them. Hey, I have so many more tips and tricks that I want to share with you, okay? Make sure you check out the videos that are beside me right now. They're more tips, tricks, things that I think that every quilter should know, tips that can make it easier for you in the sewing room. I love to share the things that I learned that made it easier for me while I was building my foundational quilting skills. Check those out and let me know what you think. I'll talk to you soon.